How relevant is the UN in this divided world? In a world increasingly defined by fragmentation, the role of the United Nations has never been more hotly debated or more critically tested. Once envisioned as a beacon of collective hope and cooperation in the wake of World War II, the UN now finds itself battling irrelevance amid political paralysis and widening geopolitical fault lines. The Security Council, ostensibly the nerve centre for global peace and security, is mired in deadlock, incapable of reaching consensus on vital resolutions concerning some of the most pressing crises of our time, from the brutal conflict in Gaza to Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, a full-scale confrontation between Iran and Israel threatens to unravel regional stability, even as UN humanitarian workers risk their lives to provide aid to those caught in the crossfire. The crisis of confidence in the UN is not merely a bureaucratic hiccup, it's emblematic of a deeper, more systemic failure of multilateralism. In this chaotic landscape, the resurgence of nationalist agendas, populist leaders, and isolationist policies epitomized by figures such as Donald Trump has only added fuel to the fire. Trump's disdain for international cooperation and his administration's withdrawal from key UN bodies signaled a stark retreat from globalism, setting a precedent that continues to reverberate worldwide. The question that now looms large is this: does the United Nations still hold the moral and diplomatic clout to unite a divided world, or has it become little more than a ceremonial stage where power politics play out? Welcome to the Global Insight. As the United Nations approaches its 80th anniversary in 2025, it does so not in triumph, but under a shadow of mounting crises and dwindling confidence. This year, the organization was forced to slash its global humanitarian appeal from $47 billion to $29 billion, the largest cut in its history. According to a recent report by Al Jazeera, only $5.6 billion has been secured so far, a paltry 13% of the amount needed. The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA, now faces what it terms brutal choices, choosing which communities eat and which go hungry, which clinics receive vaccines and which are abandoned. Major donors like the United States and the United Kingdom are increasingly turning inward, redirecting resources from humanitarian efforts to burgeoning defense budgets. These aren't just line items in a budget, they're lifelines for refugees, war-torn regions, and displaced families teetering on the edge of survival. But the UN's funding crisis is just the tip of the iceberg. At its core, the institution is grappling with a deeper dysfunction, political paralysis at the highest levels. The Security Council, long touted as the centerpiece of global peacekeeping, is now seen as emblematic of the UN's inability to adapt to a changing world. Its 5 permanent members, China, France, Russia, the UK and the US, each wielding an all-powerful veto, have used this privilege to block meaningful action on urgent issues. Whether it's the devastation in Gaza, the grinding war in Ukraine, or the spiraling violence in Sudan, progress is repeatedly thwarted by geopolitical self-interest. According to the Better World campaign, this deadlock has led to growing accusations that the UN has become an impotent observer, unable to fulfill the very mission it was born to achieve, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. For all its high-profile shortcomings, the United Nations continues to quietly achieve extraordinary feats, often in the world's most dangerous and neglected corners. In 2024 alone, UN humanitarian agencies managed to reach over 116 million people, providing critical food, shelter, and medical care, even as the total number of people in need surged past 305 million. These are not abstract numbers. They represent mothers with newborns in war zones, families displaced by flooding, and communities rebuilding after famine. UN peacekeepers, though overstretched and under-resourced, have helped to stabilize volatile regions, reducing the recurrence of violence in areas that might otherwise slip back into chaos. These efforts often receive little recognition but form the backbone of global crisis response. Beyond emergency aid, the UN continues to be a hub for global cooperation on long-term challenges. The Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, remain an ambitious yet vital roadmap for eradicating poverty, reducing inequality, and tackling climate change. Even amidst growing geopolitical division, the UN recently marked a significant milestone with the adoption of a global pandemic agreement at the World Health Assembly, proof that multilateralism can still deliver when urgency overrides politics. According to the UN Secretary-General's 2025 priorities, the organisation remains committed to amplifying collective action in a fragmented world. This enduring ability to convene nations and shape global norms may not always grab headlines, but it underscores the continuing relevance of the UN's mission. In a bold effort to revitalise the United Nations before its 80th anniversary, Secretary-General António Guterres unveiled the UN 80 initiative in March 2025. This sweeping reform blueprint seeks nothing less than the transformation of the UN into a modern, nimble and transparent institution fit for the complex realities of the 21st century. Drawing on prior commitments laid out in the Pact for the Future and the UN 2.0 agenda, the initiative focuses on enhancing operational efficiency, increasing transparency, and harnessing the power of digital innovation. According to the UN Human Rights Centre at the University of Padua, this reform process is driven by the urgent recognition that the old model, designed in the aftermath of World War II, is no longer sustainable in a world shaped by pandemics, climate crises, and digital disruption. Central to the UN 80 vision is a radical restructuring of the organisation's sprawling ecosystem. A special task force is actively considering merging dozens of UN agencies into 4 cohesive pillars: peace and security, humanitarian affairs, development, and human rights. Under this proposal, agencies like UNAIDS could be folded into the World Health Organization, while the World Food Programme, UNICEF, and UNHCR might be unified into a single humanitarian body. The goal is not only cost efficiency, but also coherence and speed, qualities desperately needed in responding to today's fast-moving crises. Additional reforms include relocating some headquarters functions to less expensive cities like Nairobi, which would decentralize decision-making and bring leadership closer to the communities that they serve. At the heart of all this lies a push for digital transformation, with artificial intelligence and data analytics set to play a central role in modernizing everything from logistics to peacekeeping. These changes, if fully realized, could redefine the way the UN operates and how it's perceived. No institution built on compromise and consensus can escape the inertia of entrenched power, and the United Nations is no exception. The most formidable barrier to reform lies with the 5 permanent members of the Security Council: the United States, United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China, who wield veto powers that effectively allow them to block any measure that threatens their geopolitical leverage. According to the Better World campaign, past attempts to curtail or reform the veto system have been met with fierce resistance, even as critics argue that this mechanism has morphed into a shield for national interests rather than a tool for global safety. Proposals like rotating permanent seats or expanding representation to include voices from the Global South have been routinely sidelined. As the world clamours for change, the P5 remain the guardians of a deeply unequal status quo. Beyond the Council chamber, resistance to reform is also brewing across the broader UN membership. Countries from the Global South worry that consolidation, merging smaller agencies into larger bureaucracies, could marginalise the influence and erase hard-won representation. At the same time, wealthier nations balk at the idea of increasing contributions or relinquishing control over key decision-making bodies. The financial stakes are rapidly escalating. Looming staff cuts, shrinking budgets, and the potential closure of high-cost headquarters are no longer hypothetical. They're deadlines etched into the 2026 calendar. With the UN 80 reforms scheduled for debate at the next General Assembly, the countdown has begun. What's at stake is not just institutional survival, but the UN's credibility as a platform for inclusive, effective global governance in a fractured world. The stakes for the United Nations have perhaps never been higher. If the UN 80 reforms manage to cut through the gridlock, the institution could emerge leaner, more inclusive, and better equipped to confront today's interwoven crises: pandemics, climate change, refugee displacement, and digital disruption. Such a transformation would restore faith in multilateralism and demonstrate that cooperation is still possible in an increasingly fragmented world. A revitalized UN could also act as a counterbalance to the growing rise of mini-lateral blocs like BRICS or the African Union, which have stepped in to fill the vacuum left by UN inertia. By making the organization more responsive, efficient, and representative, the reforms have the potential to reposition the UN as a central architect of global solutions rather than a bystander to chaos. But the reverse scenario is equally possible and deeply troubling. If the UN fails to reform, it risks becoming little more than a ceremonial shell, a place for speeches and resolutions, but not for action. The inability to respond effectively to humanitarian emergencies or enforce global norms would not only erode the institution's credibility, but also its very purpose. Civil society is already watching closely. Youth activists, climate campaigners, and grassroots organizations around the world are demanding real change on issues ranging from gender justice to environmental sustainability. As noted in the UN Secretary-General's 2025 priorities, these voices are not only growing louder, they are becoming a political force in their own right. Ignoring them would not just be a missed opportunity, it would be a strategic failure with long-term consequences. So is the United Nations still relevant in an increasingly divided world? The answer, much like the global landscape itself, is layered and complex. On one hand, the UN remains indispensable, a lifeline for millions through its humanitarian operations, a stage for global dialogue, and a framework for addressing shared challenges like pandemics, climate change, and rising inequality. Yet its very credibility and effectiveness teeter on the brink. Without bold structural reforms, the UN risks slipping into a slow and painful decline, becoming little more than a symbolic forum while real power shifts to alternative alliances and regional blocs. The vision of a cooperative, rules-based international order hangs in the balance. That's it from the team at the Global Insight for now. We want to hear what you think. Should the UN reform its veto system to break the grip of geopolitical deadlock? Is merging agencies and decentralizing operations the path to a more efficient and responsive organization? Or do you believe that the UN's relevance is beyond repair in today's fractured world? How does the future of global governance affect you? Do you know someone impacted by the UN's actions or inaction? And what do you think the world needs from the UN today? And as always, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel here at the Global Insight. And until next time, stay tuned.